There are 4 million Syrian refugees in 5 host countries. 7.6 million people in Syria are internally displaced. And half of the country's pre-war population of 23 million is in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. The topic of my khutbah today is not about Syria, but it's about how we respond when we witness terrible things like this. How we, as human beings, whether we witness these terrible things in someone else's lives in some other place, or whether we witness them in our lives, it's the same. And what you find is that there's a direct relationship between a person's notion of God and how they respond to bad and terrible things that happen to them. A few weeks ago, a man came to my door. He was from the Jehovah's Witness. And I'd never spoken to one of them before, so we chatted for a little bit. And he brought up this very situation about Syria, and we agreed, of course, that it was a terrible thing. And then as the conversation went on, he started to suggest that as if God wasn't responsible for this. And he started to explain his beliefs, that their belief in God, Jehovah, has relinquished control of the earth and has left it to human beings, and now we're functioning by ourselves under the influence of the devil. And the whole premise of the religion is that they're waiting for kingdom come, for Jesus, who they believe is God, to come back and then rule the earth again as God wills. Basically, God's not responsible for this. And then you find there's those that are atheists, who don't believe in a God at all. It's a very similar response. And in fact, some of them believe that because of the bad things that they see. How can there be a God when such things are allowed to happen? If there was a God, these things wouldn't happen. And then you find people who do believe in God and do recognize that these things are under control of God, but because of their distorted perception of Him, they also have a very negative response. I have a Christian co-worker. He was telling me about when his wife died. She died in a car accident, leaving him alone with a baby daughter. Definitely it was a terrible thing. And he told me, and he admitted to me, he said after that, he said, I became so angry at God. I hated God. So he recognized that God is the one in control of the situation, but because of his disbelief in Allah's infinite wisdom, because he couldn't recognize that there was an ultimate plan, that everything that God does is for a purpose, he had these very negative, ugly emotions. So we come now to how does the believer respond to these things. I want to share with you an example. Some years ago, I was helping some people arrange their trips to go for Hajj. And there was one brother who was kind of on the fence. And so I called him and I said, look, the groups are booking up, you need to decide now if you're going to go or not. And he said, okay, fine, I'll go. Like that. He agreed, but wasn't like wholly committed. Not long after that, he was diagnosed with cancer. And I spoke to him a few days after that. And he told me, and he was in a very emotional state by this point. And he said, you know what I'm the most afraid of? That I won't be able to complete my Hajj. See, that's the difference between a person who really understands and believes in God and a person who has some distorted perception of Him. That they realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. As we hear so often, وَلِلَّهِ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. And to Allah belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth, and Allah has power over every single thing. This belief causes us to be humble in front of God. When bad things happen, we don't deny Him, we don't blame Him, we don't develop a negative attitude about it. We submit ourselves and we become humble in front of Him. There are 2 fundamental recognitions of every believer. Simple thoughts. And I hope that you can remember it with these 2 words. Magnificence and insignificance. These 2 words. That simply put, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most magnificent being, far above all else. And human beings, relative to Him as a whole, are insignificant. I want to share with you 2 passages from the Quran that demonstrate this point. One of them, I think, that is one that everyone here is familiar with. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyu al-qayyum, la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm, lahu ma fi as-samawati wa ma fi al-ard, man dha alladhi yashfa'u 'indahu illa bi'idhnihi, يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. Allah, there is no deity except for Him, the always alive, the sustainer of all existence. Neither drowsiness overtakes Him nor sleep. To him belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on earth. Who is it that can intercede with Him except that He allows Him to? He knows what is before them and what will be after them, and they don't encompass a single thing of His knowledge except that He wills for that. His kursi extends over the heavens and the earth, and their preservation tires Him not. And He is the Most High, the Most Great. This verse that we know as the greatest verse in the Quran, it doesn't give us any rules. It's not about laws, it's not about instructions. This verse, it exclusively tells us about how great Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Every one of us knows that. But hold that in context against these verses from Surah Al-Insan, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هَلْ أَتَى عَلَى الْإِنسَانِ حِينٌ مِّنَ الدَّهْرِ لَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْئًا مَذْكُورًا إِنَّا خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِن نُطْفَةٍ أَمْشَاجٍ نَبْتَلِيهِ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلَ إِمَّا شَاكِرًا وَإِمَّا كَفُورًا. Hasn't there been over man a period of time where there was something not worth even being mentioned? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking us a question. Was there ever a period in your life where you were something so insignificant that no one even cared to mention you? And then He reminds us, verily we have created man from nutfa, from drops of mixed discharge, in order to try him, so we made him hear and see. Verily we showed him the way, whether he is grateful or ungrateful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us about our very origins. That every single one of us here started as a tiny drop, invisible to the eye, something so insignificant that no one bothered to mention us. No one even knew that we existed. That's the origin of every human being. And so when we consider this, our origin, the reality of us as ourselves, against the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that comparison, that recognition of Allah's total control of everything and our own inability of anything, leads to the most important aspect, one of the most important aspects of our belief, and that's humility. We often talk about humility in context of one another, that we should be humble in front of other people. And definitely that's something critical and important characteristic. The topic of my khutbah today is about being humble in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we should be humble in front of other people because we all have the same level. We're all of the same origin. No person can really say they're better than another person. But that humility is far more deserving when you're comparing yourself to the one who's so much greater than us, who encompasses all knowledge, who has all the ability, who created us and sustains us. And we respond with disobedience and we respond with sin. When you compare these two levels, the rational believer, the sensible person, should come to no other conclusion except that they humble themselves in front of Allah. This characteristic is not just something praiseworthy. This characteristic is something that leads to perfection in our religion in two ways. One of them is that it prevents us from committing sins. I'll just give you one statement to demonstrate that. The companions, they used to have like a motto, like their mantra. They used to say that if they didn't consider how small the sin was, rather they considered how great was the one that they were sinning against. Think about that for a second. You see that all the time. People will dismiss the things that they're doing as if it's not a big deal. The companions are saying, don't look at it that way. Don't think about the magnitude of the sin. Rather, think about the greatness of the one who you are sinning against. That's the gravity of the situation. And so when a person humbles himself in front of Allah and makes that reality, then he's far more likely to stay away from sin. And then the second aspect, the second benefit of humility, how it perfects us in our religion, is that it aids in the perfection of our worship. And I'll give several of examples of that in the second khutbah, inshallah. وَقُلِ قَوْلِي هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. The topic of my khutbah today is in regards to being humble in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in total control and we are entirely in need of Him. That recognition is critical. I mentioned in the first khutbah that one of the benefits is that it should discourage us from committing sin. And then also a benefit of being humble in front of Allah is that it will aid in the perfection of our worship to Him. I want to give you several examples. Number one is the concept of tawakkul. Tawakkul is something that we've been ordered and commanded to do, where we put our trust and dependence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-Fatiha, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to write إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Indeed, you alone do we worship, and you alone do we depend on for help and assistance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making a connection here between our worship of Him and our dependence of Him. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that Musa alayhi salam told his people, وَقَالَ مُوسَى يَا قَوْمِ إِن كُنْتُمْ آمَنْتُمْ بِاللَّهِ فَعَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلُوا إِن كُنْتُمْ مُسْلِمِينَ. And Musa said, O my people, if you have believed in Allah, then put your trust in Him if you are Muslims. If you are really of those who submit, then you must put your trust in Allah. So the relevance here to the khutbah is that a person, when he recognizes his own inability, when you recognize in your life that you're not in control of everything, that you are the one who's subservient to the Master, and you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one in total control of everything, that feeling by itself, when it leads to that dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that feeling is itself an act of worship. Not every act of worship is something that you physically say or do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also has blessed us with categories of worship that are simply reside in our heart. And if you just feel and recognize a certain way, then you are rewarded for that. So if you're in any situation, in some difficult situation, you recognize that you're not in the one control. You're not the one to bring about the result. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that you must depend on. That recognition, that feeling by itself is an act of worship, and its foundation is humility. The second act of worship that I wanted to mention was dua. An-Nu'man bin Bashir, he reported, one of the companions, he said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah. Dua, it is worship. Or you might otherwise say, it is the essence of worship. The Prophet ﷺ is not just making a connection between dua and worship. It's as if he's telling us to make dua. That's what worship is all about. That's the end game of worship. Then the Prophet ﷺ recited the verse, وَقَالَ رَبُّكُمُ ادْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبَ لَكُمْ إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ عَنْ عِبَادَتِي سَيَدْخُلُونَ جَهَنَّمَ دَاخِرِينَ. The Prophet ﷺ then recites the verse elaborating how directly connected dua and worship are. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, your Lord says, call upon me and I will respond to you. Verily, those who reject my worship or disdain my worship will enter hell in humiliation. So you see the connection. Allah is telling you, call upon me, make dua to me, and I will respond to you. And if you reject my worship, then I will punish you with hell. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using dua as if it's synonymous to worship. So again, how does this relate to the concept of humility? In dua, I'll give you an example. If you were traveling somewhere on the road, you were driving, and then you had some car trouble and you got stuck at the side of the road. If you were to call another person for help, there's a lot of conditions that apply. First, you have to have signal on your phone. And then you hope that the person will be available to answer. And then you will have to explain to them your whole situation. You'll have to tell them where you're at. You have to tell them what the problem is. And then you will hope that they are available to help you, that they're willing to help you. There's all these conditions that apply before you will receive the help. So that's if you call another person. Now every one of us, instinctively, if we were in that same position and then we were to call upon Allah, all we would simply say is, oh Allah, please help me. Think about the magnitude of that. Have you ever stopped and think about how powerful that, what's all insinuated in that phrase? By just saying, oh Allah, help me, you are recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wherever you are, can hear you. And that He has the ability to help you. And He cares and He loves to help you. and He's always available, and He always has the willingness, and He never tires of your call to help. There's no conditions that apply. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always there. In a state of dua, a person humbles themselves in front of their Lord and recognizes that He hears His servant. He loves the servant, has asked of him. He knows exactly what the servant needs, and He's completely able to answer his call. So many attributes of Allah you recognize just by making the call. Oftentimes we're so discouraged, or we're shy to ask other people for help. You continue to ask people for help and they can become annoyed at you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will become angry at you when you stop asking Him for help. But in that state of dua that the Prophet ﷺ is explaining to us is equivalent to worship. It's a synonym of worship. In that state, there's so much of it that recognizes that a person will only make dua sincerely if he's humble in front of their Lord. The last example, the last type of worship that I'll mention to you, how the concept of humility will perfect your worship is in Tawbah. Everyone recognizes that in order for us to enter into Jannah, that we have to be pure and clean. And every one of us commits sins. So the Prophet ﷺ taught us so many ways that we can ask for forgiveness. There's one particular dua that I want to mention to you that most of you probably have heard of before. It's the dua that the Prophet ﷺ referred to as Sayyid al-Istighfar, the master of asking forgiveness. So there's lots of ways to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This one, the Prophet ﷺ said, is the master dua, the best dua that you can use to ask for forgiveness. And on top of that, after he mentioned the dua to us, or before that, he mentioned to us the virtues of it. That if a person says this in the morning, having conviction in it, having full, firm faith in it, and he dies that day, he will enter paradise. And if he says this dua at night, having full, firm faith in it, conviction in it, and he dies that night, he will enter paradise. This dua of asking for forgiveness, I want to mention it to you, and then you'll see, I hope, how it relates to the point of the khutbah. The Prophet ﷺ taught us to say, Allahumma anta rabbi. O Allah, you are my Lord. La ilaha illa ant. There is no deity worthy of worship except for you. Khalaqatani. You created me. Wa ana abduk. And I am your slave. Wa ana ala ahdika wa wa'adika mastata'at. And I am trying my best to fulfill my covenant and my promise to you. A'udhu bika min sharri ma sana'at. And I seek refuge in you from the evil things that I've done. Abu'u laka bi ni'matika alayhi. And I admit that you have bestowed all the bounties that I have upon me. وَأَبُوءُ بِذَنْبِي. And I admit and I confess that I commit sins. So up to this point in the dua, it's not done yet. But to this point, how many times have you actually said, Oh Allah, forgive me? Not once yet. To this point in dua, you're making a recognition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Lord. He's the creator. You're the one who's created. We're the ones who are the slaves. That the very purpose of our life is to worship Him, and the most that any of us can say is that we're trying our best to fulfill that role. No one can even say that, oh Allah, I'm worshiping you completely and fully. No one can make that claim. And then we recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon us every single gift that we have given. And in the same, and in return we recognize that we take those very blessings that He's given us and we commit sins against Him. So up to this point, the dua is forcing the person to humble themselves, to recognize who Allah is and who you are. When you do that, now you're in the ideal position to ask for forgiveness. Then you say, "Faghfirli," just one time. So forgive me. فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا أَنْتَ. Indeed, no one can forgive sins except for you. This beautiful dua demonstrates that the seeking of forgiveness, the tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, its foundation, the perfection of it is in humbling yourself in front of Allah. Yes, we must be humble against other people. None of us should raise ourselves in pride or arrogance over another person. Far more important than that, for the very purpose of our life, is to humble ourselves in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to leave you with just a closing statement, a quote. Perceive yourself no better than any other man, and Allah will exalt you above them. and perceive yourself as nothing in front of Allah, and He will exalt you in paradise. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who are humble with people, and especially in front of Him. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us to submit to Him completely. And ask Allah to forgive us for our sins, and to bless us in this life and the next, and to save us from the punishment of the hellfire. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. سبحان الله وبحمده أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.